Welcome to the project, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about Editable in a more detailed way. So we all know Editable at a basic level. We have the tooltips and categories. Maybe you guys have been using those, but we're not going to talk about those today. Mostly what we're going to be talking about is all these different editable types, like text box, slider, number, vector slider, vector number, and then finally editable container. So let's go over them. Hi, I'm Mikey Jeanson, and this is Verse Boost. So first things first, we're going to go over the numbers. We have some basic editables that don't have anything to them, and then we have some editable numbers that specify the type. You only can pass in int or float right now unless they bring in a new numeric type. But you can see here we could pass a min value and a max value, and these take an optional of the type, so an optional int or optional float. And then the spin box delta does the same thing, and that's for snapping in the editor. So here you can see we're using all of those min value, max value, and spin box delta on this int, and then we're also using them in this float. I just have them laid out differently. You know, you can use the colon, or you can put it in brackets. You can see here I have to put it in an option, and then I use is here because I'm just showing off. So in editor, you can see our numbers. You can see that they already have a slider. I'm given a choice to slide, but it's actually really slow for ints. With floats, it's much easier to do it, but these are just by default. Remember, these are just the basic ints basic editables that have nothing on them. And then here's the editable numbers that don't have like min or max values. And you'll see when I hover over them, I don't get a slider. I have to actually type it in. And then here, when we have the min or max values, the slider will appear in editor, and you can slide in between. And if I want to set a value bigger than the range we set up, it will automatically clamp it down. Same thing if we do minimum. And it works the same way with floats. But you can see with the spin box delta being 0.5, it's stepping between 0.5 each time I'm dragging it. So yeah, next thing we're going to look at is the editable text box. This one just has two options for us. It has multi-line and max length. So you can see it's just a logic variable. True if you can have multiple lines, and false if not, and then the max length, and you can set it there. So here I have a basic string with just the basic editable, and then I have two editable text box. We have one that's empty that doesn't define multi-line or max length, and then we have ones that do. So let's see what they look like in editor. So in the editor, you can see we have I'm a string, and if I want to type in it, I can. But if I want to add a new line, I'm pressing Shift Enter right now. I can't add a new line, right? And that's kind of annoying. And then we have the basic text box. If I try to do Shift Return to do a new line, it also won't work. And then it basically is the same as basic text without any of those parameters set. But then you can see here, we have dear verse dev, subscribe to blah, blah, blah. Okay, and I only did that because I wanted some new lines. And if I want to add a new line, Shift Enter, I got it. But now you can see it's going over our 100 character allowed limit, and this is really cool. It's automatically showing us an error that we need to fix. And if we try to save, it won't let me save. So that's editable text box. Next thing we're going to look at is editable slider. So this one is a lot like editable number, except it's built to be a slider, so it has a lot more options for us. So we get the same min and max values that we saw in editable number, and you can pass a type. Okay, with the editable number, we didn't have any of these options with the slider exponent, sensitivity, and pixel per delta. So you can see here with the slider exponent, this is actually how it will display in the editor. It doesn't have anything to do with when you're dragging it. It will how it displays. So I'll show you how it works in a second, but that takes an optional parameter as well. And then we have the delta sensitivity and the pixel per delta. So in code, here's just an int and a float slider. We just have some basic setup values, some basic deltas and the exponent. I'll show you how that works in a second. And then we have some sensitivities. So here we have our sliders in the editor, and you'll see that it's pretty loose right now with the int. So I'm dragging, and it is dragging by 7 every time. But you'll notice if I go about halfway, we're not like halfway in the values, because the range is from 7 to 777. But if I go like to 350, which is you'd think is near the middle, it's far more to the right, and that's because of our exponent. If we want to make that even show up some more, we could make it 5. And then when we change that, you'll see that 350 is now almost at the complete edge of it. Next, I'll show you the editable float. So with the float, our range is really small, right? It's from 9.81 to 10. So you can see every time we step, it's by 0.1. And I know it's hard for you guys to see. You can try to follow the yellow and see how far I'm having to drag my mouse to get it to move. But just trust me when I say this is very slow stepping, right? But let's try to play around with these values. After playing with the mouse settings, it seems like no matter what you set these to, it doesn't really change anything. It seems like the delta definitely has a lot to do with it, and the range. So I would mostly focus on these values. So now we have the editable vector slider. So this has a lot of options too, and a lot of them are similar to this editable slider. But this one we see it has a show preserve ratio. And this is like this lock button right here that we see on some of our things, right? If we see the lock on our scale, it's similar to the vector slider here. And then we also have this normalize option that when it's true, it will show you this normalize button, and it will normalize the vector to length of 1, right? So we don't want that right now. So that's funny. If I undo it, it did the wrong value for that. But anyways, and then we have the min component value, max component value. So even though it's a vector, these will still be like a separate integer. So these type that you're passing, it's not like vector 3. You're typing, or you're passing like int or float. And then the data structure that you're using it on will actually be like vector 3. And that will have so you say float vector 3, I'll show you that in a sec. But then we have the slider delta, the slider exponent, and the same stuff we all had on the slider. But we have the preserve ratio and normalize on, and you guys saw me press those. And then we have the min component value and the max component value. You can see it's just a single float instead of being like 3 different ones. And then if we have the slider delta, so we're making sure it's always on 1. And then we have the slider exponent, and we have it at 1 just so it's showing up normally. So like editable number, there's another editable vector number. So we have the editable vector slider and the editable vector number, and has a lot of the same characteristics of editable number. You need the min values to have a slider, and then you have this show normalize thing that's the same as the other vector one, and the preserve ratio. Last thing we have here is the editable container, and this one's a simple one. All we have is one option for allow reordering, and this is basically for arrays. So here we have some basic editable containers. We have allow reordering true and false. In our basic one, we have the reordering, so we can go here and drag these values, and we can add and delete. But then in here, if you want to drag like we did in here, you'll see if I hover over here, there's no option to drag these values. So I've set up the verse device to just show off how these work in code. To see if the constraints actually hold up. So let's run that right now. So you'll see that all of let me filter the verse messages. You can see that it all say can. So each one of these things, when they're working in the game, right, in the code, you can overwrite the constraints that are set in our editables. So if you want to have true constraints, let me show you how to do that. So if we want a type that actually constrains the values where we can't set it outside of the thing, this is what we need to do. So this looks kind of funky, okay, but basically it's just defining a type where it's an integer, but it has a range of values. So this is basically the where is doing the heavy lifting, where it's explaining that these conditions need to be true in order for you to set to this type constraint int. One thing that's cool, you probably notice, you noticed already, is that it automatically gave me a slider, we don't have editable slider or editable number. We just have the slider already. If we change it to editable number though, and don't define a min and max value within the editable number, then it will revert to not having the slider anymore. And once we add the spin box delta in, it actually does work again. So you could use in it there. And then also, if you change these to editable slider, then it works as well as we would expect. And if we were to remove the slider delta, we'll do it on the int, it will still have our slider, and it'll just be using 1 as the basic. And the best part about type constrained is that it won't even allow you to compile trying to change the value to a value that doesn't work, right? If we were to have a method that tried to pass in a value that we don't know what's passing through, it will yell at us and say, if we don't know if it fits this range. So if we want to change the value, we have to try to typecast it, right? By using this really long type and then using the casting syntax to cast it to the range value, and then we'll try to set it. So let's see how that works. And we see here we're passing 2 values bigger than the range. If you look at the very end here, you'll see that it didn't work. No change were made because the value was out of the range. Now let me just check if you were to change it to something in range, if it would in fact work as expected. So you notice here we didn't get any print statement, and that is because that typecast did work. So if you want to define ranges, then this is how you do it. If you tried to do something where you used if you use an if statement and still try to use value, the compiler's not smart enough to figure that out, so it wouldn't work. So this is the only way you could do that. Here's what I was meaning. And if you try to do this and still try to set it, the compiler won't know that it worked. It'll just fail. So you have to do it like this. So you might be asking if we can combine these, if we can combine an editable container and an editable slider. That would be really cool, right? But the answer is unfortunately no. There's no way to do that as far as I'm aware of. But you can use the types that we're using, and then all of a sudden we can use the sliders on our stuff. Alright, that's going to be it for this video. I'll post all this code on my website as usual. But yeah, I just wanted to get back in the groove of things because I've been off for a couple weeks. So yeah, code's on the website. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace.